challenging. We've had a lot this year. What amazes me is I listen to the news and they say, oh, we're in a low inflation environment, 1.5 to 2%. The government's hoping it's going to be 2. I've seen huge inflation. Between labor bumps with minimum wage going up, which floats all boats. It doesn't just hit minimum wage. Everybody wants a raise. It all has to stay even. To food prices, food retail and restaurants, you're always examining your P&L to see how it impacts you. So labor last year impacted us $1 million in my company alone, just on the labor impact on basic minimum wage, until Doug Ford came in and sort of eased up on it and gave us some breathing room before we go to 15, and then other obligations on top of that. And then food inflation, just the cost of a head of celery or a head of cauliflower tripled for a variety of reasons. But we've had inflationary pressure. And then on the supplier side, every one of my suppliers was hit with wage increases that came back at you for a 5% increase. So
it flows right through the system and all back to you.
And it just all comes up like a rainy day with a backed up sewer. The water just starts coming at you. So it's very interesting when you hear this conversation about 2% inflation. I wish we had 2% inflation.
Now, as a business owner, you have a choice. You can either eat the cost yourself and it hits your margins, or you can pass the cost on to your customer. Is that a bit of a delicate balance? Because obviously if what you're serving and what you're offering gets too expensive, then you start losing customers.
Yeah, I think reality is that it has to be passed on. It's not as though the restaurant industry is surviving on 20% bottom lines. Most of the industry is surviving on sub 5% bottom lines. So if you're dealing with inflation and you're dealing with wage pressure at the same time, you can't go to 1%. You can't go to 0. So you have to examine what it is that your business needs and requires to function correctly, and you have to make adjustments. And there's no way you can say to yourself that you can't raise prices. There's just absolutely no way. You have to examine how high can I raise my prices. But what has happened in the industry is people have gone back in and they've re-examined their labor performance. And they've eliminated jobs, they've consolidated jobs. And you see this in retail all the time now, where you have unmanned checkouts. Even in fast food, they're doing it now. So they're taking 50% fewer people sitting behind a cash register.
And trying to automate everything and the fast food experience.
Correct, yeah. Because people are quite savvy that way. They get the technology. They're trying to do this any way they can, because they can write that investment off. They can amortize it over a number of years, and they don't have the payroll expense and the obligation of the employee. And this is where a lot of industries are going. The funny thing about the restaurant business is it doesn't change that way. I can't automate my business. My business will always be a cook, a waiter, a table, a chair, a client, a wine list, a menu. And no matter how much you automate the transaction side, the relationship you have to clients hasn't changed in 100 years, right? So I have to function on that basis, and so do all my competitors and colleagues in the business. So you have to become very sharp about how you run your P&L. Now you take a basic category like water. We used to sell a lot of bottled water, and it was a great revenue source for the restaurant. And then everybody thought it was really kind of a great thing to offer free water filtered in your restaurant. And
then, so there's a profit item that disappears.
Correct. Yeah. As much as that's a very nice idea for the consumer, and I want the consumer to understand from the restaurant side that you need all these silos of revenue within a business for it to function correctly. So now a whole bunch of younger people in the business have taken the water aspect, now they've made it a cost rather than a profit margin. And they've lost that silo of revenue. So
do you think they realize what they were doing? I mean, there's a certain disruptive factor when young people get into a business, say, we're going to do things differently, we're going to shake things up. Yeah. And sometimes when they shake them up, they break them.
Exactly, and it's not that I'm trying to penalize the client by overselling water, but all of these basic areas in a restaurant are key to making it function well. And deriving profit at the bottom end is very difficult because we have a huge number of employees to make the day happen. From the cleaning side to the cook side to the service side to the breakdown side. big inventories of wine, big inventories of food, lots of movement all day long. Like you look at the variables in the restaurant business, and there's a million places for it to go sideways on a daily basis. So from a control standpoint, it's almost like the Wild West to keep a restaurant corralled in and operating correctly. And those are the challenges of the business. It's a super complex business.
What's the life cycle then of a restaurant? Like, what would you consider a success for a McEwan restaurant to last for in years, I guess?
I look for 30 years.
30 years.
So I closed North 44 last year, and it was the first time I closed a restaurant. And that was nostalgic for me because it was my first restaurant that I owned myself. But the real estate deal going forward made no sense for me. So I had to say goodbye to it. But I was there 29 years. I've been at Vimark 17 years. I've been here, we're going into our 13th year. My retail store is 10 years old. So everything I own, I do for the long haul. And I want it to be something that ultimately is saleable in the end. Maybe I move it out and do something with it, but there's no science to me where you go in and you operate for 5 years and you shut it down. Like there's no math there, right? And that's the interesting part. So staying relevant in the business is my biggest focus every single year. Are your clients engaging with you? Do they come back? Are your revenues up? Are they down? Are they slack? You know, what is your payroll? Like I wake up every morning, 5 a.m., and I get financials on my dailies from all the businesses, and I sit and look at all the numbers. And I didn't have to used to do that in the restaurant business.
Well, so that's a change.
It was easier to make money in the restaurant business 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 6 years ago. Today, you can't just be a chef. You have to be a business person. You have to be highly focused on your numbers, and you have to know your client, and you have to look at it every day as an exercise, every single day as an exercise to survive the business. That's how complicated it is today.